On the coldest night of the year, a lone villager follows mysterious footprints into the forbidden forest, and comes face to face with the winter spirit, an ancient being who grants one wish before the year ends. But every wish comes with a cost, and not all truths are meant to be known. Join Edgar Hale on a haunting journey of desire, loss, and the weight of choices, in this immersive folktale full of suspense, magic, and chilling twists. Will he dare to speak his wish? And will the consequences be worth it? Open book, immerse yourself in this ancient winter legend. If you dare. The cold arrived before the sun had fully disappeared, creeping into the village like a living thing. It pressed its weight against doors, slipped through cracks in the walls, and settled deep into the bones of those who had lived too long in the mountains to complain anymore. Winter had always been harsh here, but this night felt different. Older, heavier, as if it carried a memory no one wanted to remember. Edgar Hale stood alone outside his small wooden house, tightening his cloak as the wind whispered through the bare trees. Snow had fallen all day, yet the ground beneath his boots was strangely untouched, smooth as untouched linen. That alone should have worried him. Snow never lay evenly in this village. The land was too restless for that. He was about to turn back inside when he saw them. Footprints. They appeared suddenly, as if the snow itself had decided to open its eyes. A single line of footprints stretched from the edge of his yard toward the eastern forest, the forbidden forest. Each step was deep and clear, yet no snow clung to the edges. They were fresh. Impossible. No one in the village walked there. Not anymore. Edgar's breath fogged the air. He knew the old rule as well as anyone. When winter deepens, the forest does not forgive. Children were raised on that warning. Adults survived by remembering it. Then the bell rang. One slow, hollow sound rolled through the village, echoing off roofs and frozen hills. Edgar froze. The bell hung in the square, its rope stiff with age and neglect. It was only rung for death, or disaster. Yet it was far too early for either. The sky had not even darkened fully. Across the village, doors opened. Faces appeared behind shutters. No one spoke, but Edgar felt the fear move from house to house like a breath held too long. The winter spirit, someone whispered, though Edgar could not tell who. The bell rang again. Edgar turned his eyes back to the footprints. They were closer now. He was certain of it. The line had lengthened, leading straight toward the forest path swallowed by shadows and snow-laden branches. He should have gone inside. He should have locked the door, lit every candle, and waited for morning like the others would. Instead, his hand tightened around the old wooden charm hanging at his neck, a simple carving of a pine branch. Margaret had made it for him. The memory came without warning. Her hands steady and warm. Her smile tired but kind. The promise he never kept. The wind shifted, and with it came a sound. Not quite a voice, not quite silence. Edgar's name brushed against his thoughts, spoken without breath. He stepped forward. As he moved through the village, he noticed things he could not explain. Fires burned with a pale blue flame. Frost spread across windows from the inside out. Dogs lay still in the snow, awake but refusing to rise. Time felt stretched, thin as ice ready to crack. At the edge of the square, Thomas Reed stood with his cane planted firmly in the ground. His face was pale, his eyes sharp despite his years. "Go back, Edgar," Thomas said quietly. "Whatever you think you saw, it's not meant for you." "You heard the bell," Edgar replied. "So did everyone," Thomas said. "That doesn't mean we answer it." Edgar looked toward the forest. The footprints waited. Thomas lowered his voice. "It only comes once a year. And never without taking something with it." "What does it take?" Edgar asked. Thomas did not answer. He only turned away. The forest swallowed sound. Snow clung to branches like white ash, and the air grew so still Edgar could hear his own heartbeat. Each step felt heavier than the last, yet the cold no longer bit his skin. It was as if the forest recognized him. The footprints ended at a frozen lake. The ice was clear, unnaturally so, revealing dark water far below. At the center stood a figure, tall and unmoving. Did not breathe. It did not cast a shadow. Snow drifted upward around it, defying the sky. Edgar stopped at the edge of the ice. The figure turned. Its face was calm, carved like stone shaped by centuries of wind. Its eyes reflected not the lake, but memories, Edgar's memories. He felt them open inside him one by one. "You are late," the winter spirit said, though its mouth did not move. Edgar tried to speak. No sound came. "The year is ending," the spirit continued. "And you are full of longing." The ice beneath Edgar's feet creaked, not with threat but with invitation. He took one step forward. Behind him, far away, the bell rang a final time. And above them all, the snow began to fall upward, carrying the weight of every wish ever made, and every price yet unpaid. The spirit beneath the ice. The lake did not feel cold. Edgar expected pain the moment his boot touched the ice, a sharp warning from the frozen world beneath him. Instead, a strange warmth rose through the soles of his feet, slow and steady, like standing near a dying fire. The surface of the lake was smooth as glass, and beneath it the dark water lay perfectly still, as if time itself had stopped breathing. The winter spirit stood a few steps away, tall and silent. Snow drifted around it in reverse, lifting from the ground and spiraling upward into the gray. Edgar's heart pounded, yet fear did not fully claim him. Something stronger held him in place, a pull he had felt his entire life but never understood. "You have crossed the boundary," the spirit said. His voice did not echo. It did not need to. The words formed directly inside Edgar's mind, clear and heavy. "Few do." Edgar swallowed. His throat felt dry, though frost clung to his beard. "Are you real?" he asked, surprised that his voice returned at last. The spirit tilted its head slightly, as if considering the question. "That depends on what you believe is real." Edgar glanced back toward the forest. The village lights were gone. Not extinguished, simply absent, as if the village had been erased from the night. "You rang the bell," Edgar said. "Why?" "To announce the turning," the spirit replied. "The old year is dying. The new one has not yet been born. This hour belongs to me." Edgar remembered the stories told in low voices by candlelight. Once a year, before the final breath of the old year, the winter spirit woke. "Chose one soul. One wish. No more." "What do you want from me?" Edgar asked. The spirit's gaze deepened. "I want nothing. You are the one who wants." The words struck harder than any wind. Edgar felt his chest tighten. He thought of Margaret again, not as she had been at the end, pale and silent, but as she once was, laughing as she carved small figures from scraps of wood. He had promised her something. He had waited too long. "I didn't come to wish," Edgar said, though even he could hear the lie in his voice. "No one ever does," the spirit replied. A crack formed beneath the ice, thin and glowing faintly blue. Edgar stepped back in alarm, but the crack did not spread. It formed a perfect circle between him and the spirit. "Look," the spirit said. The ice beneath the circle cleared further, and images began to move in the water below. Edgar saw the village as it once was. Smaller, poorer, but full of life. He saw a young woman standing where the healer's hut now stood, her hands trembling as she spoke to the spirit long ago. She wished for beauty, the spirit said. She was given it. Others saw only her face. No one saw her heart again. The image shifted. A man knelt beside the lake, his fists clenched. He wished for wealth. The gold came. So did the hunger to keep it. More faces appeared. More wishes. None of them ended in screaming or fire. The changes were quiet, subtle. Lives bent slightly out of shape, like wood warped by dampness. "Why show me this?" Edgar asked. "Because you believe wishing means escape," the spirit said. "It does not. It means exchange." Edgar's breath shook. "What is the price?" The spirit's eyes softened, just enough to be unsettling. "The price is never the same. And it is never what you offer. Silence stretched between them. Somewhere far above, the clouds shifted, though no wind stirred the trees. How much time do I have? Edgar asked. Until the final bell of the year, the spirit replied. When it rings, the door closes. And if I refuse? The spirit turned slightly, and for the first time Edgar sensed something like sadness. Then you will live with what you already carry. Most do. The ice dimmed, the images fading back into darkness. The warmth beneath Edgar's feet receded, and the cold returned, sharp and real. You may go, the spirit said. Think carefully. I already know what you want. The question is whether you are ready to lose it. The forest reappeared behind Edgar in a rush of sound, the creak of trees, the distant howl of wind. The village lights flickered back into existence far away. Edgar stepped off the ice. When he turned, the lake was empty. Snow fell normally now, drifting downward as it always had. Only the frozen surface remained, smooth and unbroken, as if no one had ever stood there at all. Edgar walked back toward the village, each step heavier than the last. The bell would ring again before dawn. He could feel it in his chest, counting down not in hours but in heartbeats. Behind him, beneath the ice, something ancient stirred, patient, watchful and certain. The winter spirit waited. The village did not sleep. Edgar felt it the moment he stepped past the first row of houses. Lamps burned longer than they should have. Curtains shifted though no wind moved them. The night seemed stretched thin, like a breath held too long, and every sound carried farther than usual. The crunch of his boots, the creak of wood, the distant murmur of uneasy voices. People knew something was wrong. Edgar reached his house and closed the door behind him, resting his forehead against the cold wood. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of what he now carried. The spirit's words echoed in his mind. I already know what you want. He lit a candle. The flame flared blue for a moment before settling into yellow. That small detail unsettled him more than the spirit itself. The world was bending, quietly, carefully, and it had begun long before he made any choice. Margaret's chair sat empty by the hearth. Edgar lowered himself into it, staring at the carving tools scattered on the table. He had not touched them in months. Every unfinished piece reminded him of time he believed he would always have. A knock came at the door. Edgar stiffened. No one visited this late, not on the last night of the year. He rose slowly and opened it. Clara Wynne stood on the threshold, her dark cloak dusted with snow. Her eyes, sharp and observant as ever, flicked past Edgar into the room. You saw it, she said, not bothering with greeting. Edgar stepped aside to let her in. So did you. Clara removed her gloves, rubbing her hands together. Not with my eyes. With my bones. The air feels wrong. She studied Edgar's face. You went to the lake. Edgar did not deny it. Clara exhaled slowly. Then the old stories are true. Not all of them, Edgar said. But enough. She sat at the table, her expression tight. My grandmother wrote things down. Things the elders didn't want remembered. She hesitated. The spirit doesn't grant wishes the way people think. I know, Edgar said quietly. It grants truth. Clara's gaze sharpened. Then you understand the danger. Before Edgar could respond, another knock sounded. Harder this time. Edgar opened the door to find Thomas Reed leaning heavily on his cane. His face lined deeper than before. I told you not to go, Thomas said. And yet you're here, Edgar replied. Thomas entered, closing the door behind him. He did not sit. Because once, long ago, I stood where you stood. The room fell silent. I was chosen, Thomas continued. Or nearly. The spirit came to me when I was young and angry and full of want. I wanted to change the village. Make it better. Stronger. Clara's breath caught. You never told anyone. Thomas's jaw tightened. Because I walked away. And I've spent my life wondering if that was cowardice or wisdom. Edgar looked at him. Why didn't you wish? Thomas's voice dropped. Because I realized the spirit doesn't ask what you say. It listens for what you cannot let go of. The words settled heavily in the room. Outside, the wind rose, carrying with it the faint sound of the bell rope tightening on its own. Clara stood. There's something else, she said. The spirit isn't choosing at random. It watches for years. Sometimes lifetimes. Edgar felt a chill deeper than winter. Then it knew Margaret. Clara nodded. And it knows what happened to her. The room seemed to tilt. Edgar gripped the edge of the table. She fell ill, he said, though doubt crept into his voice. Clara met his eyes. No illness leaves frost on the inside of the lungs. The memory returned. Margaret's final breath, cold against his skin. The window rhymed with ice though the fire burned hot. Outside, the bell began to toll again. Slowly, deliberately. Thomas placed a hand on Edgar's shoulder. You still have a choice. Edgar closed his eyes. In the darkness, his desire took shape. Not words, not images, but a weight he had carried since the night Margaret died. When he opened them, his decision was already made. I have to go back, he said. The final bell rang once more. Time was almost gone. The bell's final toll did not fade. Its sound stretched across the village, across the forest, across the frozen lake, vibrating through bone and memory alike. Edgar felt it with every step as he walked back toward the forest, alone this time. Clara had wanted to follow. Thomas had tried to stop him. But some paths were meant for only one set of footprints. The night had deepened, yet the sky held no stars. Snow drifted slowly, carefully, as if the world itself was listening. When Edgar reached the lake, the ice was no longer smooth. Fine cracks traced patterns across its surface, glowing faintly blue, like veins beneath pale skin. At the center stood the winter spirit, unchanged and eternal. You have returned, it said. I have, Edgar replied. His voice was steady now. The fear had settled into something quieter. Acceptance. The year is nearly done, the spirit continued. Speak. Edgar stepped onto the ice. The cold did not resist him. It welcomed him. I know you already understand my wish, Edgar said. But I will say it anyway. I want the truth. About Margaret. About her death. About what I failed to see. The spirit studied him for a long moment. You do not wish to undo, it said. You wish to understand. Yes. The ice beneath them cleared, revealing the past like a reflection that could not be avoided. Edgar saw Margaret again, alive, sitting by the window on the first night of the deep winter. He saw the frost creeping inward, slow and deliberate. He saw the moment she realized she was not alone. She was chosen, the spirit said softly. As you were. She carried a wish she never spoke. The image shifted. Margaret stood at the edge of the forest, her hand over her heart, fear and resolve tangled together. She wished to protect you, the spirit continued. From me. From yourself. From the hunger that grows when grief is fed. Edgar's chest tightened. And the price. She took it into herself, the spirit said. She became the boundary. The frost. The silence that kept me from you, for a time. The images faded. The lake darkened. She did not die from illness, the spirit said. She chose to end the cycle you would have begun. Edgar sank to his knees. Tears froze on his lashes before they could fall. You asked for truth, the spirit said. It is yours. But truth changes nothing unless you let it. The bell rang again, its final breath. The spirit straightened. The year ends. The ice shattered, not outward but inward, collapsing into light. Edgar felt something lift from his chest, a weight he had mistaken for love but was, in truth, fear of loss. The lake froze again instantly, sealing the moment. When Edgar awoke, dawn was breaking. The village stood quiet but whole. Fires burned warm and steady. Frost had retreated from the windows. Thomas watched from the square as Edgar emerged from the forest, older somehow but lighter. Clara felt it too, the shift. The balance restored. The winter spirit slept once more beneath the ice, its duty fulfilled. And as the new year breathed its first breath, Edgar carried the truth forward, not as a wound, but as a promise finally kept. Far away, snow began to fall again, downward, as it always had. Spring did not arrive all at once. In the mountain village, winter never truly surrendered. It loosened its grip slowly, like an old guardian reluctant to leave its post. Snow softened into slush along the paths. Icicles wept steadily from the eaves. The river groaned as ice broke apart, carrying the memory of cold downstream. Edgar noticed the changes before anyone else did. He rose earlier now before the sun cleared the peaks, and stepped outside to breathe air that no longer burned his lungs. The forest no longer felt forbidden. It stood quiet and watchful as it always had, but without that heavy pressure he had carried his entire life. People noticed Edgar too. They said he walked differently, straighter, as if some invisible weight had been set down at last. He returned to his workshop for the first time since Margaret's death. Dust lay thick on the shelves. Half-finished carvings stared back at him. Faces without eyes, hands without purpose. For a long while, he only stood there, listening to the familiar creak of the floorboards. Then he picked up his tools. The first thing he carved was not a figure or a charm, but a simple bowl. His hands remembered what his heart had forgotten. The steady rhythm of work grounded him. Each curl of wood that fell away felt like an offering, not to the spirit, but to the life that continued despite loss. Clara visited often. She brought herbs, news, and silence when it was needed. One afternoon, as they shared tea by the open door, she spoke what many had been thinking. The winter felt shorter this year, she said. Edgar nodded. It ended when it was meant to. She studied him carefully. Do you regret your wish? Edgar considered the question. He thought of the truth he now carried. Heavy, painful, but honest. He thought of Margaret's choice, and the love hidden inside it. No, he said at last. But I understand why so few survive their wishes. Clara smiled faintly. Understanding is rarer than magic. The village elders met less often now. The bell in the square hung silent, its rope finally replaced after years of neglect. Children played closer to the forest edge. Dogs barked again at night, alive and restless. Thomas Reed passed away quietly before the snow fully melted. At his funeral, Edgar stood among the villagers, listening to the wind move through the trees. Thomas had lived long enough to see the cycle complete itself. In the end, that had been his peace. On the first night of true spring, Edgar walked alone to the frozen lake. Ice still clung to the edges, but the center had begun to melt, dark water breathing beneath pale moonlight. Edgar did not step onto it. He did not need to. I know you're listening, he said softly. The lake did not answer. It did not need to. Edgar placed a small carving at the water's edge. A pine branch, just like the charm Margaret had made him long ago. Not as an offering, not as a plea, simply as remembrance. The water rippled once. Nothing more. As Edgar turned back toward the village, the wind carried no whisper of his name. Only the sound of thawing earth, of roots waking beneath the snow. Far beneath the lake, the winter spirit slept, bound once more to the turning of time. It would wake again someday when the year stood on its final breath. But that night belonged to the living. Edgar walked home under a sky no longer heavy with waiting. The future remained uncertain, as all futures do, but it was finally his to face without fear. And in the quiet space where longing once ruled, something steadier grew. Not a wish, but a life. Spring did not arrive all at once. In the mountain village, winter never truly surrendered. It loosened its grip slowly, like an old guardian reluctant to leave its post. Snow softened into slush along the paths. Icicles wept steadily from the eaves. The river groaned as ice broke apart, carrying the memory of cold downstream. Edgar noticed the changes before anyone else did. He rose earlier now before the sun cleared the peaks, and stepped outside to breathe air that no longer burned his lungs. The forest no longer felt forbidden. It stood quiet and watchful as it always had, but without that heavy pressure he had carried his entire life. People noticed Edgar too. They said he walked differently, straighter, as if some invisible weight had been set down at last. He returned to his workshop for the first time since Margaret's death. Dust lay thick on the shelves. Half-finished carvings stared back at him. Faces without eyes, hands without purpose. For a long while, he only stood there, listening to the familiar creak of the floorboards. Then he picked up his tools. The first thing he carved was not a figure or a charm, but a simple bowl. His hands remembered what his heart had forgotten. The steady rhythm of work grounded him. Each curl of wood that fell away felt like an offering, not to the spirit, but to the life that continued despite loss. Clara visited often. She brought herbs, news, and silence when it was needed. One afternoon, as they shared tea by the open door, she spoke what many had been thinking. "The winter felt shorter this year," she said. Edgar nodded. "It ended when it was meant to." She studied him carefully. "Do you regret your wish?" Edgar considered the question. He thought of the truth he now carried. Heavy, painful, but honest. He thought of Margaret's choice, and the love hidden inside it. "No," he said at last. "But I understand why so few survive their wishes." Clara smiled faintly. Understanding is rarer than magic. The village elders met less often now. The bell in the square hung silent, its rope finally replaced after years of neglect. Children played closer to the forest edge. Dogs barked again at night, alive and restless. Thomas Reed passed away quietly before the snow fully melted. At his funeral, Edgar stood among the villagers, listening to the wind move through the trees. Thomas had lived long enough to see the cycle complete itself. In the end, that had been his peace. On the first night of true spring, Edgar walked alone to the frozen lake. Ice still clung to the edges, but the center had begun to melt, dark water breathing beneath pale moonlight. Edgar did not step onto it. He did not need to. "I know you're listening," he said softly. The lake did not answer. It did not need to. Edgar placed a small carving at the water's edge. A pine branch, just like the charm Margaret had made him long ago. Not as an offering, not as a plea, simply as remembrance. The water rippled once. Nothing more. As Edgar turned back toward the village, the wind carried no whisper of his name. Only the sound of thawing earth, of roots waking beneath the snow. Far beneath the lake, the winter spirit slept, bound once more to the turning of time. It would wake again someday when the year stood on its final breath. But that night belonged to the living. Edgar walked home under a sky no longer heavy with waiting. The future remained uncertain, as all futures do, but it was finally his to face without fear. And in the quiet space where longing once ruled, something steadier grew. Not a wish, but a life. Years passed quietly in the village. Snow came and went as it always had, but something about the air felt lighter, almost forgiving. The stories of the winter spirit persisted, whispered by villagers by firelight, passed to children in cautionary tones, but no one truly believed the lake still held a power strong enough to reach a single soul. Except Edgar. He walked the forest paths daily, though no one saw him do it. He carried the memory of the ice and the spirit like a scar that healed but never vanished. His hands were never empty, always a carving, a token, a small reminder that life continued, fragile yet persistent. Sometimes he worked into the night, letting the rhythm of his craft drown out the ghostly echo of that last snowfall. Clara visited less often now, though their friendship had deepened into a quiet companionship. They spoke of herbs and village ailments, of the forest's subtle changes, but never of the wish or the winter spirit. Some truths they both understood were too heavy for ordinary conversation. One evening, when the first snow of the season fell, Edgar walked to the lake again. The surface was no longer perfect ice, but the water still mirrored the sky in haunting clarity. The village lay in shadow behind him, smoke curling lazily from chimneys. He paused at the edge of the frozen water, feeling the faint stir of old magic beneath. "You sleep again," he murmured, half to himself, half to the unseen watcher. "And I live." The wind responded, not with words, but with the brushing of trees, the gentle rustle of pine needles. Edgar thought of Margaret. The truth of her sacrifice was no longer sharp pain. It had settled into understanding, a quiet respect. She had chosen to protect him, to give him clarity where grief had blinded him. The lake shimmered in the twilight. Something shifted beneath the surface, slow and deliberate. Edgar did not step back. He did not fear. The winter spirit did not appear this night. It did not need to. Its presence lingered in the air, in the silence, in the choices the living made each day. He knelt and placed a small carved figure at the water's edge. A simple pine branch, etched with care. This was no plea, no wish. It was remembrance, recognition, life continuing in honor of what had been given, and what had been lost. The village bell rang faintly in the distance, carried by the wind. No one had touched it. Yet its sound did not alarm Edgar. He understood now. The bell was a marker, not of fear, but of time passing, of life continuing, and of lessons quietly learned. As he walked back to the village, snow dusted his shoulders. The forest seemed to bow lightly, the trees whispering in rhythms older than memory. Children played near the edge of the woods, their laughter clear and unhindered. Dogs barked, and the river sang as it carried the melting ice downstream. Edgar smiled, a small quiet thing. For the first time since Margaret's death, he felt the weight of longing ease. The winter spirit would awaken again, of course, its cycle eternal, but for now the world belonged to those who lived within it. And sometimes, in the whisper of the wind or the reflection in still water, Edgar imagined that Margaret was watching too, at peace, knowing the truth he had carried with care. The forest exhaled. The lake shimmered. Life went on. And winter at last was complete.